Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me today, and I hope you're having a great week. If you're not already a subscriber to the podcast, make sure to subscribe and follow it so that you never miss an episode. Also, share this episode with your family and friends and on social media, and visit the PAS Report website, pasreport.com. Now, the 2024 elections have kicked off. We now have the Iowa caucuses in the books, and there's a lot at stake. It's not just about the presidential election, even though that's going to be the majority of the focus, but you have the House at stake, the Senate, a number of governorships, state legislative bodies. They all hang in the balance. And the question today is, are you ready for the 2024 elections? This question, it's essential, especially given everything that's at stake. And in this episode, I want to talk about Iowa for a few minutes. I will talk about where I see the Republican primary going. I'm going to discuss why this is one of the most unpredictable election cycles in our history. However, I also want to discuss what it will take to win. See, the truth is that there is a lot of doom and gloom out there, and it's coming from both sides. But I'm going to explain why that's not usually the best election strategy. There are a set of core issues that candidates should focus on, and the candidates would be better served to put out messages of optimism over doom. And I will tell you now that if anyone thinks they know how this election is going to shape up, they must have gotten into Hunter Biden's stash. They're smoking what he's smoking, because there are so many variables that we've never witnessed before. So no one knows how this is all going to play out. And I want to remind you of what happened in 2022 when you had all these people predicting a red wave, including myself. I'm not going to deny that. I, along with a whole bunch of other people, were completely wrong. We were all saying that it looked like a red wave, and it turned out to be a trickle. See, elections from a political science perspective, they used to be pretty easy to predict. You took some current polls, previous election cycles, matched them up with variables, and you would get pretty damn close to predicting who's going to win an election, what party's going to take the majority, and I did that in 2022. The arguments I used to support my predictions were solid. The analysis was solid too, but I made one critical error. I compared the variables to previous election cycles, and those models may no longer apply in this day and age. At any other point in our history, I would have been spot on with my prediction. However, we are not living in normal times. These are uncanny times, and so I got it completely wrong. So I'll definitely be a little more careful in the 2024 election cycle, and it's important to understand that you don't let emotion drive your analysis. Present the facts and back it up with evidence. Now, when we're looking at the Iowa caucus, because that was the first in the nation to go, it was a huge win. The former president of the United States thoroughly dominated the contest. He won with over 50%, and it was a historic victory. There's little doubt about that. And I know some aren't going to like this, but it's clear. The former president of the United States is the odds-on favorite to win the Republican primary. At this point, I don't see anything that stops him. I don't see anything that prevents him from racking up victory after victory after victory. Now, you may not like that. You may disagree with that analysis, and it's not me slamming the other candidates. It's me just pointing out the obvious. In just about every single state, he is ahead by double digits. In some cases, it goes up to 30, 40 points. So you're talking about an election cycle where a former president of the United States is dominating, and people are surprised by this. It's not a surprise. And then you factor in the 4 criminal cases, the civil indictments trying to destroy him financially, and you see that Republicans have coalesced and rallied around him. It's funny because, you have a lot of Democrats out there saying how divided the Republican Party is. And they say that based on the Iowa caucuses that you see the clear divisions. However, I'm not saying that, because if I look back to previous caucuses, I see the polls a lot closer. I see the person that normally wins only wins by a few points. President Trump won by over 30 points. And so when we look at that, we have to understand that that's dominating. If we look at South Carolina, Nikki Haley's home state, Trump is dominating. You look at Florida, Ron DeSantis' home state, Trump's dominating. He is the odds-on favorite to win the Republican primary. Anything can happen. Anything can change that. But I don't see anything changing that as of right now. What I did find pretty funny, to be honest with you, was the reaction. And I just want to point out Rachel Maddow from MSNBC because she's one of the funniest. Take a listen to what she had to say after Trump's performance.
The big picture takeaway from that, and I don't mean to be, again, too dark, as you said, on this, but it is not, if we are worried about the rise of authoritarianism in this country, we are worried about potential rise of fascism in this country, if we're worried about our democracy falling to an authoritarian and potentially fascist form of government, the leader who is trying to do that is part of that equation. But people wanting that is a much bigger part of that equation. Right. And the American electorate is made up of two major parties. One of those parties has been flirting with extremism on the ultra-right for a very long time. They've brought them in a way that they haven't been central to Republican electoral politics ever before, and I know because I've been studying this. But once you have radicalized one major party so that those are the preferences of the people who adhere to your party, the leader is interchangeable. And yes, Trumpism is sometimes what we call it. MAGA movement is probably a better way to do it. But there is an authoritarian movement inside Republican politics that isn't being bamboozled by Trump. They are pushing Trump to get more and more extreme because the more extreme things he says, the more they adhere to him. And that is coming from a very large proportion of the American right that adheres to the Republican Party. And that's why this is a Republican Party problem more than it is the problem of one man and his leadership.
I mean, talk about a certifiable loon. And it's not just her. I mean, basically, all the Democrats think the way she does. There's a lot in power that think the way she does. And this is truly amazing to me because when I hear the screams of fascism, of authoritarianism, Republicans that vote for Trump are voting for authoritarianism, it really is stunning to me that these people lack any sense of self-awareness. They don't even realize their own projection. They're calling anyone that votes, democratic process, I'll remind you, for the former president as voting for authoritarianism, voting for dictatorship. Meanwhile, these are the same people that want to grant government all power over our lives. These are the same people that were calling for lockdowns and mask mandates and vaccine mandates. And if you dared defy any of these decrees, they wanted to thoroughly destroy you. These are the same people that are using the levers of power, the government, in order to target political opponents, whether it's the FBI targeting parents and Catholics and MAGA supporters, whether it's the Department of Justice through the special counsel and what we see with Jack Smith. It's New York State, New York City, where we're seeing the New York State Attorney General destroy Trump financially. You're seeing the New York City District Attorney trying to charge Trump with a BS case that was already investigated by the Southern District and the FBI, both and the FEC, stating that there was nothing there to prosecute. You have the Georgia case where you now have DA Fani Willis embroiled in a scandal where a person on her team that she's sleeping with ended up visiting the White House for over 8 hours. They met with the January 6th committee. I have little doubt that we're going to find out that there was meetings with the special counsel, Jack Smith's special counsel. I have little doubt about that. And then it turns out that she was using government funds to pay for junkets in order to, have her affair with this guy. Taxpayer dollars. That was the same thing that took down Eliot Spitzer in 2009. It wasn't that Eliot Spitzer was hanging out with a prostitute, even though he's a hypocrite and would throw people in jail for doing that. It was that he was using public money, government money, your money, taxpayer money, in order to pay for hotel stays to meet up with the prostitutes. So that's the same thing that Fani Willis is doing. So now her case is all in disarray. But the same people that scream about authoritarianism are the same that want to use all the levers of power to target political opponents. These are the same people that want to ban gas stoves and gas cars and dictate what you can and cannot buy. So it really is rich coming from them about warning of the coming authoritarianism, where I could guarantee you that if you gave these people a poll, that they would say, by probably a majority, that anyone that supports Trump should be re-educated, deprogrammed, purged, or in Hillary Clinton's case, formal deprogram she called for. So it's an absolute joke. Now, what does the Iowa caucus actually tell us about the state of the general election? It tells us nothing. I mean, it tells us what's going on in the Republican primary. It gives us a snapshot in time in the Republican primary, but it doesn't tell us much for the overall general election. Not just the presidential election, but the House races, the Senate races, the governorships, and the state legislative bodies. But I do want to talk about the issues that every candidate should be focusing on, because there are a set of core issues that if Republicans want to be successful, they need to begin to talk about these issues in depth and put out plans. They need to be able to speak to the American people and win over voters, because that's the objective. Winning over voters. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back from the break, there's 4 key issues that I think that people should be focusing on, and I'm talking about the candidates themselves, because I think that that's what's going to make or break the election. So everyone, hang tight. I'll be right back. When things go sideways, you want to be prepared. Protect you and your family. And people are concerned. They might have to go for a long time without food, electricity. That's why I want to introduce you to 4patriots.com. Get preparedness products you could use now, and that could save your life later. My favorite is 4Patriots' new solar generator, the Patriot Power Generator 2000X. It uses the endless free power of the sun to power your lights, your TV, medical equipment, even run your fridge. Plus, it's expandable and comes with a free solar panel. Or you can pick up one of 4Patriots' best-selling survival food kits. Delicious tasting and designed to last for 25 years. They even have kits with real meat. And if the power's out, no worries. Just boil water over fire, simmer, and serve. You're going to enjoy a hot meal and stay safe in a crisis. More smart people than ever are finding 4Patriots. Over 2 million customers trust them, and you might have even seen them on TV. I had the folks at 4Patriots set up a special page for you at 4patriots.com/PAS so that listeners of this podcast can see this week's discounts and deals before they go away. Go to 4patriots.com/PAS, but you gotta hurry because the deals don't last long. So save more money, get peace of mind, and protect you and your family. Go to 4patriots.com/PAS. Welcome back, everyone. So now let's talk about the actual issues, the issues that matter to ordinary Americans. And I'm not talking about just conservative Americans or Republican Americans. I'm talking about all Americans. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. We all have to coexist in this country, and there are a couple of issues that I believe are transcending normal political party lines. Now, if you speak to Republicans and conservatives, including conservatives like myself, my number one issue would be the overbearing and overwhelming power of the federal government, the growth of government. And that's, to me, is a key issue. I want to see a limited government. I believe our government can easily be cut by a third. I believe that power needs to be restored to the people. However, you have to understand that when I'm speaking that way, it's like speaking to the choir. That's not going to win over a whole bunch of voters. It may win over some independents, but that's not going to be the core issues that are going to impact and change the dynamics of this election. The core issues that most people are focusing on right now, that most people want to hear about, first is Bidenomics. Bidenomics is a disaster. People are worse off today than they were 4 years ago. People's economies and livelihoods have deteriorated. People are living paycheck to paycheck. People cannot handle the increase in the cost of goods, particularly the necessities like food and energy. And as wages have increased, people aren't feeling it because their wages haven't really increased. As a matter of fact, their household wealth has actually declined because they're paying more for everything else. And so you do have to stick to the message of economics. James Carville, it's the economy, stupid. It's really not that hard. And this administration is so out of touch with the American people. They keep on coming out there and saying, look at the economy. It's on fire. Bidenomics, it's working great for you. You're just too dumb to realize it. They cannot relate to the ordinary people. They can't relate to the struggles that ordinary people have each and every day. And they're telling you that you should be grateful for the Biden economy that is built on a bunch of house of cards that collapse at any moment, and that translates into our lives becoming more difficult. So I'm not going to harp on Bidenomics because I believe that's the easy one. The second issue that I think is critically important is the migration issue. When you look at illegal immigration in the United States, it's a catastrophic disaster. And I brought this up last week when Under this administration, you have 6 to 9 million people that have entered the country. The Biden administration, as well as Democrat-run cities, the sanctuary cities, that don't really want to be sanctuary cities anymore, but they invited it, so now the pox is on them. But when you look at it, this is a big problem for all those that have prioritized illegal immigrants over American citizens, the needs of these immigrants over the American citizens. And these issues all dovetail with each other, right? Because as your life becomes much more difficult, well, when you hear that the Biden administration and city agencies are handing out tons of money to house, to feed, to provide health care, to provide education, it's extraordinary, right? Now, by law in the United States, we are a decent and humane nation. So when it comes to something like children, let's look at some of the unaccompanied minors. You'd have over 400,000 unaccompanied minors into the United States. We know that at least 300,000 have been admitted into the United States. We know in New York City alone, 30,000 have been enrolled in the public school system. Now, again, we're a decent and humane nation. If you are a child and you're in this country, we're going to try and educate you. Doesn't help anyone to have you uneducated sitting and roaming the streets. So we are going to try and educate you. But it does come with a huge cost to taxpayers. It costs, in New York City, they spend $38,000 per student per year when it comes to the public school system. Well, introducing 30,000 newly enrolled students just this year alone, the unaccompanied minors, well, think about the billions upon billions of taxpayer dollars that costs. Think about how the quality of education declines. And then think about the horrible education that these foreign students are going to receive, where they're going to be told that America is a horrible country, it's inherently evil, inherently racist, and you could see they'll never assimilate into the American system, but that's the intent. When you look at the influx that's taking place, it is historic, it is profound, but more importantly, it is destructive. And I advise you to listen to my episode last week, where I talked about you cannot have this system of open borders along with a welfare state, along with a military-industrial complex, along with a $34 trillion debt. It simply does not work. And I really think that's a critical issue. I think Americans are seeing what's going on with their own eyes. They're getting bitter, they're getting resentful, but the public servants don't care because they forgot what public service is all about. Used to be to serve the public. Now it means to rule over. And I think that every single one of these public servants should pay the price. They should be held accountable. So it would be incumbent and behoove Republicans to go into these communities that they've long ignored, not for a couple of years, but for decades, that they've long ignored, and talk to the people in these communities. And I'm talking about the Chicagos. I'm talking about the South Bronx. I'm talking about Brooklyn. Talk to the people in these communities. Tell them that you hear them. You hear their suffering. You hear their pain. You hear what they're going through. And then provide solutions. You know, Speaker McCarthy last year, he released his plan for America. Nobody even remembers what the name of that plan is. So Republicans need to develop a simple plan that speaks to the needs of the people, of the constituencies. That's how you win people over. And you have to look at the education system. The education system is a major issue. Republicans didn't take advantage of that in 2022. So in September of 2022, the Department of Education comes out, releases a report that we now have the lowest proficiency levels that we've ever seen, that students aren't being educated, learning loss is dramatic, the academic achievement gap has widened dramatically, and that over 1 million students just stopped showing up. We just lost track of them. They're no longer in the school system. Now, Republicans should have taken that in September of 2022. They should have gone into every single neighborhood where the schools were shut down for more than 6 months, up to 2 years in certain places, to speak to those parents, to tell those parents, look at what they did to your children. They have set your children back decades, and they're not looking to fix the problem as we're witnessing here in New York. Instead of correcting the failures and the destructive policies because of them, they just redefined proficiency. They dumbed the standards down. They dropped the standards in order to cover up their own failures. If you look at places like Oregon, it's dropped its reading, writing, math proficiency requirements to obtain a high school diploma. So what is education worth when you have no standards? Well, then you don't have an education system. And so Republicans should be going into these areas, and they should be speaking with these parents, and they should be showing the harm that these officials did to their children. Again, The name of the game is bringing in new voters, having new voters come out and support you. That's how you win elections. And Republicans would be wise to do that. They also need to build out their get out the vote campaign, but we'll talk about that in the next block. The last thing is the national debt. We have to be honest with the American people. We have to tell the American people that we need a government that's fiscally responsible, that the federal government cannot be anything and everything to everyone, that the government can't possibly take care of every little issue that exists, that it is unsustainable on its current pathway, that we are spending $34 trillion debt with $1 trillion interest tab each and every year. And the interest will only continue to go up. We are going to be spending more on interest than on defense, than on entitlements, than on anything. And we either start getting our fiscal house in order today, or we wait and we kick the can down the road. And we kick it down the road for another 5 or 10 years, but then we're not going to be talking about making limited cuts. Then we're going to be talking about gutting entire programs. So we have to talk about fiscal responsibility as well. We have to talk about the idea of welfare reform. Those are winning issues. I mean, the vast majority of people are not on welfare. Most people believe that there should be a welfare to work requirement. This is not rocket science. Politics is not rocket science. And you have to stick to the issues. But you have to show how you'll solve these problems. And if you could show the American people how you're going to solve the problems, you're going to win over the voters. And I want to talk about the voter base, because the voter base is really important. Too often, you have the political parties that focus internally. Now, in a caucus level, that may be smart. But when it comes to a general election, it is different. And I'll talk about that when we get back from this quick break. Welcome back, everyone. So we spoke about the issues, and now we have to talk about voters, because the name of the game is getting people to turn out and vote. Now, Democrats always have a solid plan. I mean, the Democrat get-out-the-vote machine is astounding. And yes, it's filled with a lot of corruption. I have little doubt about that. Okay, the whole idea of mail-in votes and the drop boxes, I mean, it's crazy. We should have voting. One day, if you have an issue, if you are disabled, if there's something going on, sure, get an absentee ballot. I have no problem with that. But widespread mail-in voting should not be the norm, nor should they just be mailing out ballots to every single registered voter, because that's inviting chaos, that's inviting fraud. We need to be able to determine on election day who won elections, not 3, 4, 5 weeks later. When the longer it takes to determine who won an election, the more it looks like the election was a scam. So if you want to prevent the quote-unquote conspiracy theories, you'll get the elections in order. However, they're not going to do that, because obviously it plays to the Democrat advantage, and in order to change election processes, well, you need to get into power. Now, certain states have made reforms which are good. But let's look at the voters. So in the primaries, it's important to speak to your base, right? I mean, they're the ones that are doing the voting. Most states have closed primaries where you could only vote in the primary of your registered political party. And so that is important. You need to focus on your own constituents and party members. However, see, Republicans have a habit of only focusing on their own, not just in the primaries, but throughout the election cycle. And that you can't do. Okay, you have to start reaching out to independents. One of the big red flags that I saw following the 2022 elections, normally, in any midterm election, the minority party will win the majority of independent voters. And it's usually by 2/3. Well, in 2022, that didn't happen. In fact, the Democrats actually won the independent vote, 48% to 46%. That doesn't happen too often. So Republicans have to ask themselves, why are they losing out on the independent vote? And there are two reasons for this. One, they have no outreach to independent voters or non-affiliated voters. They do very little outreach. Listen, in politics, when you're speaking to the choir, Republicans are motivated. Conservatives are motivated. They're going to go out and vote. Okay, yes, the 7, 8, 9, 10% that are turned off by former President Trump, if he is the nominee, they may not turn out to vote. But the vast majority of Republicans are going to turn out to vote for whoever the Republican nominee is. It's irrelevant. So the key is to start reaching out to non-affiliated voters, independent voters, and those who are above the age of 18 but haven't voted in years. There's a lot of those voters out there. Understand, America has a pathetic voter turnout. Of eligible voters, local elections, only 10 to about 30% of eligible voters will actually go out and vote. when it comes to statewide elections. It's only about 35 to 55% of the people will turn out to vote in statewide elections. When it comes to presidential elections, it's anywhere from about 45% to about 60% of people will turn out to vote. So there are a lot of voters that actually never vote. And the question is why? Why are they so detached from the system? And those are the people that if you could bring them back into the fold, you will win elections, hands down. See, Republicans, they need to win not just through the Electoral College, they need to win by popular vote. They need to start expanding their base. They need to bring back all the conservative independents that have been turned off by the reckless spending of the Republican Party. That will simply just rubber stamp every single Democrat proposal. Speaking to the choir isn't going to help you win a general election. Speaking to those who haven't supported you and winning over their support is, and you could only win over their support by presenting real solutions, by listening to those people, listening to what their concerns are and addressing those concerns. You can only do it by displaying a sense of optimism, of where you see the United States going under your leadership. If you do those things and you focus on those issues, you will win the election. If you ignore those issues, if it's all about doom and gloom, if you don't try and expand your voter base, you lose. It's as simple as that. Now, I hope you found the content of this episode informative. If you did, please leave the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating. Take 30 seconds to write a review on any podcast platform that allows it, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, share this episode with your family, friends, and on social media. And I want to thank you for joining me today. I'll be back next week with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.